Hello, everyone. I'm Florian North of the University Museum at Hong Kong U, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the third episode of our lecture series on re-examining modernity and contemporaneity through Chinese art. Today, we have Xing Zhao present a paper and Selina Ho moderate the Q&A session. Xing Zhao completed her doctorate only last year at UC San Diego, and she works for the University of Nanjing in China as an assistant professor of art. Selina Ho is also an assistant professor and now acting head of the Department of Visual Studies at Nanjing University in Hong Kong. Xing's presentation today focuses on the International Exhibition of Chinese Art in London in 1935, which deployed art for public diplomacy and spoke a modern international language that embodied the rising awareness of national culture as promoted by the League of Nations. So this was a really important moment in European history between the two wars, and when internationalism that's then somewhat ended a little bit by World War II for a brief decade or so, but became very important and was really rising through the 20s and the 30s. And so I'm personally very excited to hear from Xing. So over to you, Xing. Thank you for presenting your paper to us.
Thank you, Florian. It's really warm welcome. And I can't wait to share with you my thoughts on this significant exhibit. Although it's not a completed paper or essay yet, it's just my collection of thoughts. And I want to discuss with you and see how you think about this. Not only, we would call it an event, a cultural event, which is significant in the history of art. So let me share with you some pictures, and hope you can all see it. I entitled this topic, Nationalist Internationalism, which seem to be two controversial, contrary words. When people think of nationalist, people think of populism, people think of the domestic confidence, people think of the exclusive love for the country, for the civilizations, and so forth. And when people think about internationalism, people think about mutual benefits and globalization, so forth. It seems to be two conflicting terms. This indicates the complication of this topic, because I'll start with the brief literature review, how people wrote on this topic previously, and you will see that people are either leaning towards the nationalist or internationalist, totally splitting the two topics as if they're not writing on the same exhibit. Now I try to entangle them, put them back together to give a new explanation. Okay, so this is the preview, you can see. So we notice an increasing number of Chinese art exhibitions in Europe during the interbellum. The International Exhibition of Chinese Art showing pre-modern artworks in London from November 1935 to March 1936 engrossed the audience for its unrivaled scale and exquisite artworks. Earlier studies have scrutinized the artworks and intellectual commentaries and conceptualize the event from the point of view either the Great Britain's neo-Orientalism or China's cultural nationalism. The two isms, neo-Orientalism or cultural nationalism, the two separate isms, conveniently explain the effect of the exhibition in two separate national contexts, as if they're two things, one in Great Britain and one in China, and people examine them separately. And later studies have examined China's diplomat to the League of representative to the League of Nations, who is also the ambassador to Great Britain, Guo Taiqi, because in order to persuade the Chinese government to host the exhibit, he calculated the possible monetary and diplomatic benefits that were received from the exhibition in reference to an earlier international exhibition of Italian art, which the scholars think, oh, so it's not just about very metaphysical and abstract ideas of nationalism. Maybe we can think about financial and political stimulus. Then people went to extreme, and there are a whole bunch of studies studying the financial gain from the exhibit as if it's only for the monetary purposes. More recent, within this decade, the recent decade, the more recent studies have investigated into this interwar global dynamics and explore the role of liberal internationalism. Because when we're talking about internationalism, we know there are several kinds. We have planetary internationalism, which we know led by the Soviet. And also we have liberal internationalism. Sometimes we call it Wilsonism, by the name that you know that it's a more economic-driven, so-called, kind of related to the neoliberalism, right? Kind of economic-driven internationalism promoted by President Wilson. So people started to explore this role of liberal internationalism in this London exhibition, especially this historian who is now, I think, a lecturer at the Birmingham University, Ilaria Scaglia. She analyzed the staged photos, especially all the photos in the whole process of this exhibition were documented and publicized, from how they boxed it, put on the ship, how they transferred from one warship to another, how they put on the car and people waiting outside the burning house, waiting for the cases to come, all those, and unboxing it, posing. So she noticed the well-documented series of photos, right? And so she tried to decode the highly symbolic value of those photos, manifesting the mutual respect between the Chinese and the British. For instance, the photos magnify the careful handling of the artworks by both sides. They also highlight the British warship, which was used to ship the artworks and thus transform into an emissary of friendship. So it was a warship, now it's transferring artworks. Given the rising tension among the gradually more self-interested, nationalistic, and authoritarian states in the 30s, Scaglia concluded that the Republican China, quote, epitomizes commitment to the internationalist project, end quote, to obtain more support from the peacemaking League of Nations, because the League was seen as the last hope for geopolitical idealism, which people still want to grab the last bit of light and last bit of hope of geopolitical idealism. Then later we know another term, which is called geopolitical realism, right? Especially led to the Second World War, right? Scaglia further argued that after the exhibition, a more clear understanding of China replaced the vaguely imagined East. Overall, her study celebrated the quote, achievement of a harmonious balance between national and international interest, in which peaceful and cordial exchanges with one another occurred. So it's very pessimistic, very positive thinking that it's a total success, it's achievement. I was inspired by this more recent studies, but I don't agree everything about it. I still think, no, it's probably not as optimistic as it writes. So here, I'll examine how this exhibition performed as a symbol for the, first of all, institutional bureaucratic apparatus of the KMT government and the newly installed non-territorial diplomatic practice. Now we call it public diplomacy or cultural diplomacy, but at that time, this term was not coined yet. So it's more like, and in more general term, it's a non-territorial diplomatic practice. So it's two different aspects of liberal internationalism espoused by the Chinese and endorsed by the British, which included exhibiting art and promoting culture. And I'll also start with the discussion of how powerful centralized government was needed to coordinate the statist interagency collaboration. Because instead of saying that it's a nationalist effect, I would say it's a statist, because sometimes people put, nation state as if they're one term, but think deep into that. A nation and a state, or also nationalist and statist, they're two separate things. One is about the government apparatus, the institutional bureaucratic structures. One is more about the civilization, the popular culture, the hegemony, right? It's two things. So instead of directly saying that it's a nationalist thing, it's more like a statist achievement. And this statist interagency collaboration between the ministries capable of bringing the different crucial international and national elements of the exhibition together. What I call statism here refers to the institutionalizing doctrine that the political authority of the state legitimizes its leadership and involvement in the socio-economic, political, legal, and ideological realm. So by saying statism, I'm not saying that now it has a more complete structure. It's because of the more completed institutional bureaucratic structure, so that the leadership extends from the political to the social, economic, to the culture, to the ideology. So it's reinforcing each other. Next, I'll situate this exhibit in the context of this escalating geopolitical realism. Why it's performing this internationalism? Because people were feeling this threatening from the escalating geopolitical realism, right? People thinking that, oh, the war is coming, the countries become more self-interested and we're under threat, and there are different opinions, different parties within each country, and they want to they compete with each other, they're wrestling. Right? So this internationalism was performed under this situation. And so that I can delineate the internationalist struggle. It's not only, say, achievement leading to a bigger achievement, but it's a struggle of the Chinese and British organizers. The exhibition participated in the cultural internationalism, which was intended to cultivate communication, understanding, and call for international equality among the sovereign states. Last but not least, I argue against the idea that the exhibition promoted cultural nationalism inside Republican China. Instead, I believe that the exhibition served as a reminder to the Chinese of the British point of view of China as a subordinate, muted group, because the Chinese scholars were not allowed. So if you think about, hey, this is an international exhibition of Chinese art, then the Chinese scholars should be able to decide. But no, they're not allowed to decide artworks for the exhibition and speak for the Chinese art. Through the Western gaze, the exhibition did not part the Orientalist mist of the East or solidify the image of China, but instead further contributed to a new version of Orientalism. That's what I call New Orientalism. But usually this term is for people's new imagination of the Mid East, but here it also applies for the East Asian examples, right? So celebrating the artistic and literary achievement of the Republic in China's historicized past, because we have to historicized past, and the exhibitory convention was to legally exercise the national apparatuses and mobilize different institutional agents to develop certain forms of nationalism, which further reified the authoritarian leadership of the states. By 1935, the effective military suppression of the intra-party components and the competing party, alongside with the concession of some provincial warlords, captivated the KMT government to set up a structural foundation for the provisional one-party government. So here, four ministries, namely the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Interior, and the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Education, assisted by the Institute for Exhibiting Antiquities, which is, we know that now the Gugong Boguan in Beijing, right? But back in 1914, the first part of the palace, the Forbidden Palace, turned into this Institute for Exhibiting Antiquities, and later the back part turned into the Palace Museum in 25. So it's there are two different institutes. So also assisted by this two instituted in the Forbidden Palace. They formed this London exhibition. So this showed interagency collaboration amid the four ministries, indicated the mutual benefits in the four aspects. And so not only diplomacy, but international relations, domestic civil affairs, economics, and social education. Because exhibition, it's an interesting story that exhibition was first placed into the Ministry of Interior as part of the Office for Ritual and History, something like that. But later it's moved to the Social Education Office in the Ministry of Education. So its exhibition is seen as part of the social education instead of ritual and tradition at the time. So political centralization. I'm showing early exhibit in a year prior to the London exhibition. So, because I started this talk by saying that in the interbellum, there are increasing number of exhibitions sent to Europe. Chinese are showing Europe. So what are they? And why this interagency collaboration of the London exhibition matter? We have to give this comparative framework to see how they perform, what is the operational structure in earlier exhibition during the interbellum. So I'm giving this picture of the contemporary Chinese painting it's a traveling exhibition starting in Berlin, then they travel to other cities, Geneva, Milan, so on and so forth. So political centralization was reflected in increasing institutional effectiveness and interagency collaboration in the preparations for the examination. In previous exhibitions, it has been rare, if basically it's not non-existing, for agencies to jointly develop and manage cultural programs. For instance, if we trace back to 1929, the first national art exhibition in Shanghai, people think, hey, it's a national art exhibition. It must be organized by a certain ministry or multiple ministries. No, it was mainly organized by businessmen and art intellectuals and gentries. So it's just under the name of a national, and it's entitled, say, hey, we're supported by this, but actually it's businessmen, right? And art intellectuals. The Ministry of Education endorsed the National Arts Exhibition only in recognition of Cai Yuanpei's personal charisma. And also, if later China's participation, which is not fully realized, in the 1933 Chicago World Expo was executed by the municipal, provincial, and overseas preparatory committees separately. So it's like, hey, provincially, we want to promote this set of products, and we're just doing our own job, and we contact the team overseas, so on and so forth. And it's coordinated by the Ministry of Basic Industries. So although it's expo, there are exhibitions supposed to be involved in it. The Ministry of Education, for Foreign Affairs, they never involve. They just say, hey, it's about business. So the Ministry of Basic Industries, you chime in, right? So in 1933, this L'Exposition de la Peinture Chinoise, which by the name that you will see, it's a tour exhibition starting in Paris, but later it goes to many other cities. It's exhibition of Chinese painting, organized by Xu Beihong, and also this one, the contemporary Chinese painting, organized by Liu Haisu, started in Berlin, received minimal support from any institutional sectors, except for insufficient and overdue government funding. For instance, Xu Beihong, after he toured around and showed the works, and also he had to sell works along his way in order to fund his next stop. But he complained. He said, he wrote in his memoir, he said, supported by very few friends, I overcame many obstacles and finally realized the vision. Domestically and nationally, I absolutely never used the name of the government to smooth things out. I only acknowledged assistance from academic institutions, including the National Central University, the Franco-Chinois Institute in Lyon, and the China National Art Association, which is the first official art association affiliated to the National Central University, which is now Nanjing University. That's why we're celebrating our 120th anniversary. That's just an anecdote. So he continued writes, the budget was the most difficult part in the whole process, not until 3 days after the closure. So it's retrospect. It's not, sometimes we think, because it's expensive, you have to take all the cases overseas. How can you pay it out of your own pocket, right? So not until 3 days after the closure of the Paris exhibition did we receive a small amount of support from the Chinese government. All those institutions that are supposed to distribute funding for cultural purposes were muted. Actually, he was cheated, and he was given empty promises by some ministers like Li Shizhen, so on and so forth. So what I quoted just now indicate that the public organization and institutions that contributed to the exhibition in a very minimum, cautious, indirect manner. Therefore, the organization and curatorship were largely subject to the curator's idiosyncrasy and eccentricity. That's why we say that the London exhibition was so special, because the establishment of these ministries' collaboration, the institutional civil actors, marked a mile for the Republic of China as a modern nation state, showing that overtly repressed. When we say modern nation state, we're not saying, hey, we're celebrating it, it's all good, but actually we're referring to this overly repressive state apparatus, right, have been turned into a collaborative state apparatus of repression and ideology. Because before, it's just a mechanism of repressive state apparatus. Now it's a collaborative state apparatus of repression and ideology. So these are my collage of a lot of newspapers. So the nationalist government had long anticipated China's participation in the international network on Anglo-French leadership and imperial hegemony, but also avoiding possible involvement with the expanding Soviet-led anti-capitalist internationalism. So, there are, as I mentioned, two types of internationalism. They want to lean towards the liberal internationalism, and they want to repress, they want to avoid the anti-capitalist proletarian internationalism. However, the intention of the British in holding the exhibition has received less scholarly attention, as if the international exhibition was purely rooted in the appeasement diplomacy launched by the Chinese side. The international exhibition was also in the political ideological interest of the British pacifists. Of course, not both parties, not the entire government, but the British pacifists, who were longing for a return to the 1920s democratic idealism and the liberal internationalism at a time of growing militarism and diminishing pacifism in Europe and within UK. Funded in the Great Britain in 1918, the League of Nations Union, not League of Nations, but League of Nations Union, aimed for, quote, wholly new kind of diplomacy rooted in openness and trust, end quote, which was tremendously discredited by the League of Nations. So the Union is responding to the League of Nations. Discredited by the League of Nations' failed attempts to ensure the international justice and collective security in the 30s. The interwar years saw the startling rise of Nazism, the spectacular economic recovery of Germany, Japan's growing militarism, which all destabilized the hegemony of democratic idealism and roused imperialist rivalry and cultural pessimism within UK. That's why they sent Lytton to involve in this London exhibition. This Lytton's involvement in this London exhibition indicated the direct connection between this League of Nations Union, which is a association in UK, and the International Exhibition of Chinese Art. In 3 years before, right, appointed by the League of Nations, Lytton, the Lytton Commission inspected the Mukden incidents, which is 9/18, right, and decided that Japan had acted bellicosely, and China has stronger historical claim to Manchuria. So after the League agreed to accept the Lytton Commission's conclusion, Japan resigned from the League of Nations. So Lytton, head of the investigation team, also served as the director of the Management Operation Council of this international exhibition, who led a group of vice directors comprised of equal parts Chinese and British officers. And the international exhibition became a spectacle for the reassurance of the possibility of liberal internationalism in an era of pervasive statism. So although we say it's a result of the statism within China, but internationalism, internationally, it's become a sign that it's to combat against the pervasive statism in all different countries. The British organizers of the exhibition attempted to visually present multilateral collaborations across the globe, showcase the splendor of Chinese civilization as an enlightened patriotism. Enlightened patriotism is also a topic within UK. It's not a global term that we used in every context. So they define this enlightened patriotism as, quote, accommodating model of internationalism which anchored the movement firmly in the established value of the British society. So especially in the 20s, the concept of enlightened patriotism crafted the rhetoric that engulfed the nation, inspiring the commitment to loving Britain, quote, within a wider set of obligation to the international community. So loving the Britain and spread the same love to the globe is what they call enlightened patriotism. So here we see that it becomes a very exhibitory and celebratory showcase that although we see the rising militarism, but we can also see that in Japan, for instance, there's still conflicting opinions. Some are for the militarism, some are for internationalism. So we see here a collage of reportage. Japan, Soviet, Swiss, Belgium, and US, they all, the US one, I didn't paste it here, it's too crowded, but we know a whole lot of countries, they all send people, their royal family, and works to the work to the exhibition. But does that provoke nationalism and make the Chinese people think, oh, I'm so proud, it gives us cultural confidence by showing the works there? We know, as I mentioned previously, almost every single studies that I found written on this topic saying that it's cultural nationalism, people are so proud. But by searching, I found more oppositions, that people, instead of feeling proud and confident, people felt humiliated domestically. So to the government, although to the KMT government, the art exhibition was about representing the territorial state under powerful central government, but to the intellectuals and the other audiences, it was a visualization of intellectual history of the nation. Like the intellectuals shared the collective memory of the imperial powers belligerent looting in recent history, and they were so humiliated by the latitude the KMT government gave to those they perceive as foreign criminals who were allowed to serve on exhibition committee. We mentioned Lytton, who was on site, the Lytton Commission who investigated, but besides Lytton, there are other people that really irritated the Chinese intellectuals. The Chinese organizing committee assigned a few young university-trained Chinese archaeologists and art historians who had received higher education, even their PhDs, doctoral degrees. They earned their degrees overseas and in prestigious universities. They tried to ensure the academic credibility and scientific methodology in this whole preparation. Moreover, the executive yuan, which is the executive department, the institution of the KMT government, showed generosity, sincerity, willingness to compromising all aspects to establish an international identity based on intellectual leadership. That's what they say. However, the British members of the committee insisted on playing a dominant role in selecting, exhibiting, and writing about art. Say, the Chinese, you cannot even write the captions because you know nothing about art history. And we know these artworks better and we select. Although it's about the Chinese art exhibit, you have no say. And kept criticizing the art history texts written by the Chinese scholars by changing the information, not just the argument that they changed, but also say the dynasties, the titles, the materials, everything with details that they would like to change in the caption. As the subordinate group in the cultural context, the Chinese scholars were muted again and again throughout the international exhibition. Such a forced silence negated any notion of equality in the realm of academia and cultural exchange. The greater concern of the Chinese came from the public history of the constant loss of assets to the imperialist powers and nationalist government's weakness in foreign policies. The forced displacement and dysfunction of the objects in the London exhibition reminded people of their own powerlessness in the face of the losses of material evidence of the national identity and eventually national sovereignty. Therefore, an open letter, actually there are a lot, by Lin Yutang, by Xu Beihong, by everyone, like dozens, 50, 60, many scholars. I'm just exemplifying one here. So one one of the many open letters of objection jointly signed by 28 renowned Chinese scholars were simultaneously published, circulated in several major newspapers. The letter saying that the Palace Museum is the only museum in China. How can we send the precious collection overseas without any insurance? So this insurance problem lasted. I saw all the reportages lasted in March, in April, even on the eve of the preview of Shanghai, even on the eve of the works being sent to UK. So it's solved. Although they say, hey, yeah, we bought insurance, but they were never clarified. So it's a problem. Those, and also there, as they unpack those, we saw that in the documentary that they broke something. So how can we send those without any insurance? This sounds like a joke. The British mood monetarily swung a drastic reversal from modesty to arrogance. Their hostile intention leads to inevitable doubts. We also heard that the British cited him to China a few committee members whose visas allowed 2 months stay in Shanghai, so the British side can unpack the boxes already safely handled by the Palace Museum and reselect the artworks. So they don't even have an agency in select. Pitifully, the loan exhibition are national treasures of China. So the Chinese side should preserve the right of selection. How can Chinese committee allow the foreigners to unpack, mess up, and choose the exhibits as they will? It only showcases the incapacity of organizing. And they also heard from the selection committee, the members sent by the British organizers, which are confirmed later from news report, including Paul Pelliot, who accompanied with Aurora Stan, who we know that both of them infamously bribed the local Taoist priest in Dunhuang, stole countless pre-Tang antiquities, which had kept in Bibliothèque Nationale de France. We saw in previous, say, here, one of those reportages, I think it's on the far right, it's about France would send their Dunhuang collection from their Bibliothèque Nationale to join the exhibit. Right. And have been, so these people, and especially it's under this condition that in the early 30s, the Chinese government have first time imposed laws on smuggling, and they also deported some of the people. Now they're granting them visas again. So it's like whitewashing whom had been called thieves before, have been deprived of visa before. Now it's granted, and they're coming back as experts. So, right. So pathetically pleading in turn, this public letter expresses insecurity based on past experience. It was not only the fear of losing the exhibits to the British, the scholars were also irritated by the condescending attitude of the British side, reminding them of the unequal power relations that extended to the non-territorial event. So I'm gonna hurry up as I see the time. So for instance, this one, this Buddha, which was not directly sent from the Palace Museum, but it was smuggled by C.T. Lu. If you know the Red Building in Paris, Lu Qingzai, C.T. Lu, he was a dealer, he was a smuggler. You also know Zhao Ling Liujun, right? He broke the Zhao Ling Liujun and sent it overseas. He loaned the exhibition this particular Han Chun 5 Dynasty Buddha. Now it's still in British Museum today, 2022, still on staircase. So it kind of confirmed the sense of insecurity of those pledging scholars that there's a potential loss, and who are participating in it. Not only Pelliot, not only Stein, but also C. Lu, right? Turning into what? If it's a loan exhibition under the name of the government, you have all the smugglers. And and another thing, the condescending is about the date. So the British side requested every single work has to be before 1800. So they only want works before 1800. Anything after that, no. This reminds, I just talked about two exhibits, one led by Xu Beihong, one led by Liu Haisu. They insist on we have to exhibit contemporary works by contemporary artists of Republican China to show this continuity of civilization achievement that we're still practicing this. And I just show a picture of Liu Haisu doing this painting on site, showing that, hey, the literary culture continues. They insist on contemporarity, the continuity. Now, upon the request of the British side, only pre-1800 artworks are welcomed. So the cutoff year of 1800 also marked the first official contact between the British and the Chinese. George III and the Qianlong Emperor of the Qing Dynasty exchanged gifts via Macourtney embassy to Beijing in 1793, which is 7 years before the 1800, right? Led by George Macourtney to celebrate Qianlong Emperor's 83rd birthday. The embassy did not reach a trade deal or cultivate friendship between the two empires, but Qianlong Emperor wrote two extremely condescending edicts to George III of England, in which he expressed his rejection of global connectivity. The Qianlong Emperor wrote, "Our celestial empire possesses all things in prolific abundance and lacks no product within its borders. There's no need to import manufactures of outside barbarians in exchange for our own product," end quote. After leaving the Forbidden City, Lord Macourtney gathered information on the Qing Empire and was disillusioned by the country's obstinance, poor urban infrastructure, and backward technology, showing the divinely fantasy of Chinese earlier travelogue to be untrue. This new discovery foreshadowed Britain's later to force the Qing into its global trading and imperial network. We all know the Opium War and later things. Later, George III exhibited the gifts from Qianlong Emperor, which influenced later generations of royal families, including George V, who celebrated his 80th birthday in 1935. That's why a lot of Chinese scholars complaining that it's just a appeasement of diplomacy to send gifts to celebrate the 80th birthday of George V. So see it as a mirror image of the Macourtney embassy to Qianlong, and now they're having this revenge, receiving gifts. So there's Xu Beihong, and a lot of people wrote on this because they say if you want to know Chinese culture and civilization, you have to emphasize the contemporary. It's the contemporary culture. It's not just antiquity. You're just denying. Right. So due to the time, I'm just gonna conclude. So basically, and also after this exhibit, and this exhibit was overwhelmingly composed by vessels and potteries, but also because of all the lectures, so on, so it gives episode in the study of Chinese art history in Europe. And people started seeing Chinese painting not as a symbolic communicative system, but, quote, a fabric of science that the culture weaves around itself. So Neo-Orientalism is no longer exotic seeking, but it's kind of seeing everything as a fabric of science and a culture weaves around it. So later on, we know that, for instance, people saw Zen, that's Japanese, but I'm just borrowing that as example. People saw one painting, say, hey, that's Zen, so they imply to everything. They kind of essentialize the culture as if everything is a symbol of the entire culture. They have this fantastic fascination. And also they have this fascination of overly poetic, romantic, peace-loving stereotype of the East. So that's different from the previous Orientalism, which is exoticism seeking. So that's why I say that there are a whole bunch of essays written on this imagined culture, peace-loving culture, poetic culture, how everything is a symbol. So I see that as not a clear image of China, but they just crafted a new imagination of the East. So that's the point that I'm arguing against Scaglia. So in conclusion, that explains why I give this two opposite worlds in the title. It's both internationalist, but within this internationalist, there's nationalist concerns, there's statist concerns. It seemed to be nationalist, but at the same time, it didn't provoke cultural confidence within the people. It's just the statist confidence within the government. And all those different things entangled together, which formulated this historical culture event. And we need to investigate it, not from one side, one aspect, one national context, but to mingle all those elements together and re-examine it. And that's what I want to share with you today. Selena, are you there? Hello, Selena, are you there?
Is Selena online?
Selena, you're muted.
Sorry? Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, can you hear? I'm sorry. Yeah, I just mentioned it's a fascinating, very amazing talk. Actually, it is very good revisit of this landmark exhibitions because it's very important in the history of exhibiting Chinese art, and actually many scholars have studied this exhibition, but I have seen most of the articles quite emphasize on the impact of these exhibitions or the Western receptions of art or their collections, the museum collections. Really very few scholars will look into Chinese response to the exhibition or the perspective. And also, I think what Xing has offered us today is amazing to expect the perspective for China from a new perspective. Bringing into a new terms, nationalist, internationalism. I think it's a very interesting point to argue how the nationalist governments in those days, right, with its to speak an international language that quite resonates with the needs of nations in those days. And also want to present a nationalist cultures because audience may not know this was the first time the collections of a Palace Museum was shown overseas. So I think what impressed me, I think, was the way you trying to present the international collaborations for collective representations of different collections from other countries. I think this is amazing because again, in those days, I think the list of nation designs are very good organization aiming at peace and intergovernment collaboration. But actually the governments failed to even prevent Japan from aggressions, right? And also Japan and Germany also left before this exhibition. I think it's amazing that you touch upon this area. And also, I think you have offered us a very good point, good study to reconsider other past exhibitions of Chinese art from a historical and cultural, political, and economic perspective, and also can help us to understand more about the capacities and motivations, right, underlying the recent blockbusters exhibition of Chinese art. Although the capitals maybe plays a greater role, right, than nationalism or global forces. So I think I have a question for you, but I have seen some of the questions in the chat room. Let me see. Actually, the questions is more about some of the details. That's like a question is about to share how did the audience in Republican China perceive of this traveling exhibition in Europe, especially the then contemporary artists.
You mean back at the time?
Yeah.
I saw two opposite voices. One is the office, of course, the officials, they would write. They also say, hey, we have great receptions. There are a lot of audiences. It's a great success. They show great friendship. Basically, those reportages and commentaries came on like Zhongyang Ribao, those official channels. But intellectuals, as I mentioned, they have open letters. The open letters that I cited, they're by university professors, basically Beijing University professors and also intellectuals, and they're thinking that we're losing those. And also people went to, other intellectuals, they went to the preview in Shanghai. They would sourly say that as a Chinese, we couldn't see these treasures inside China. So thank you to the international exhibition, we got to see what's going to be seen by the foreigners. But actually the preview in Shanghai was not planned at the first place. It's the KMT government, they want to comfort the intellectuals. They say, hey, we'll just let you see what's going to be exhibited beforehand, so that when they return, you will see that the objects really return. We didn't give them to the UK. That's why they have this preview. So people responded to this preview as well. And of course, I'm saying, hey, it's eye-opening. But I also see a lot of people say, thanks to them, otherwise I would never see it in my lifespan.
As I know, there's post exhibitions right after the exhibition in London. So what was the response to it? You know, yeah.
So afterwards, it's just like the preview, because it's more like the government assurance to the people that here what we sent to the UK. Now they returned. So basically, I would say that after they returned, it's kind of more positive, because what happened has already happened. What's whatever given or potentially given, they could not investigate anymore. So we saw a diminishing number of criticism, and people just say, hey, this is just eye-opening, so on and so forth later.
Okay, see. Then another questions are also more about the process of this exhibition. Can you elaborate more on the organizational structure of this? I think you mentioned a bit about the institutional collaborations, right? And this audience also asks who actually are the organizers and who chairs the committee and who lobby the various governments lend the artwork and who invites and got all the people together to go to join this exhibition.
It's a very
I think you can talk a little bit about the background of this exhibition.
One thing is they try to match the Chinese and British side. They try to match the official levels of paper. Of course, every time if we have international exhibition, they have the honorarian, not honorable, those honorable members. The honorable members, of course, the president, minister of this, minister of that. But as I mentioned, the Chinese side, 4 ministries. So the ministers would be in the committee. The 4 ministries are Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Finance, and Ministry of Education. And for the education part is the Social Education Office that was particularly in charge. And also to oversee this thing, one is Ma Heng from Palace Museum, who is superseding this. And in UK, one is Guo Taiqi, who is the ambassador, and one is Guo Taiqi, and the other is Zheng Tianxi. I showed the picture because Zheng Tianxi later became the ambassador to the UK. He was the only one who doesn't have an American background, because he successfully coordinated the exhibit. So later he played this important political role. So I think operationally, diplomatically, it's Guo Taiqi and Zheng Tianxi, and academically, it's Ma Heng, and honorably, of course, it's all the ministers.
From British side, I heard the collectors David perceive a way to initiate this exhibition.
Yeah.
Is it? Am I correct?
Yeah, you're correct. You're correct. He's the one who proposed it, first initiated. Yeah.
And internally, domestically, some international in mainland China in those days also against, right, opposed this proposal, but in the end, yeah, for many reasons. Yeah. I want to ask, actually, have you considered the political, if you want to further develop your paper or studies, that will you consider the political divisions after the Civil War, that actually the national governments continued to use the collection of Palace Museum to foster its legitimacy for diplomatic purpose, to have a big show again in the United States in 1960, as you know, right? And then in mainland parts, the communist stage, right? But they trying to not just put this collection of Palace Museum as a part of history only, and trying to make it signifies the feudal and Confucian societies, but nothing to deal with the new, the Mao's modernizations plan for, all their political new power, right? So will you consider this perspective when you
Actually, because for this particular paper, because it's dealing with the Republican era, but what you mentioned later, after the Civil War, that's
because your topic may be talking about the nationalists, right? And internationals. I think government still using this strategy, maybe another ways entangle these two kinds of forces, right? In after the Second World War.
Actually, what you mentioned is gonna be in my book, which would come out next year.
Okay, we can discuss later. But for your today's study, I think it's also relevant, and you can maybe consider.
You mentioned this competing of semi-international exhibition. Actually, in mainland China, they first established the office dedicated to the long exhibition to promote cultural diplomacy. Actually, it's in 70s. Before, there's a long period that they don't have this.
Yeah.
In 72, that Wenwuju, they have this dedicated office. They find out, oh, it's important, and we don't have any worries. And so that's a chapter actually in my
I just think any continuities, because your studies now quite talk about the nationalist approach, right? Thinking when they move to other territories, and then
it's very connected. It's
this is very connected. Yeah. So thank you. I think that's all for my part. Thanks so much, Dr. Xin. Maybe I hand over the time to Dr. Lotte.
I am indeed, and I thank you, Selina. This is a great opportunity for me to quickly jump in again and thank both of you, especially you, Xing, for the paper. Very interesting to me because I don't know so much about Chinese paintings of the earlier part of the 20th century and the exhibitions that were done at the time. But as we continue to do Chinese art exhibitions, of course, it's very important for us to know more about the international reception and the history, also the history of these exhibitions and the history of collecting. So thank you once again very, very much, both of you, also you, Selina, for this third wonderful session. Thank you all for joining. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.